He's been telling people that CBC tried to silence him for about a year now. Well, just recently, Travis Dhanraj, the former host of Canada Tonight with Travis Dhanraj, showed up at a parliamentary committee and named names.
When it came to politics, interviews were blocked under guardrails, governed by an internal document never made public, titled Parameters for Political Guests. Political access was centralized, booking decisions controlled elsewhere. It did not happen once. It became a pattern. It became the standard. Power in Politics, hosted by David Cochrane, was given gatekeeping authority over which politicians could appear on Canada Tonight. When I questioned that control and who was in control, I was viewed as disruptive. Now, at the same time, I raised concerns about a toxic environment. After I sat down with Speaker Greg Fergus for a conversation on Black History Month, Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton circulated internal communications questioning my program, copying senior leadership, insinuating she or Mr. Cochrane should have done the interview.
Hello, welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. I'm Brian Lilly, your host, and joining us to talk about his testimony, his experience at CBC, and why the state broadcaster needs to change is Travis Dhanraj. Travis, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I thought to myself today, what can I do to dissuade the conspiracy theories that this is all, made up and right wing? And I thought, you know what, I should go on with Brian Lilly to do that.
Well, look, you and I have known each other for quite a while. We used to work together at Queen's Park, different media outlets, but, in the gallery. Tell people how you ended up at CBC. How did you go from being a pain in Doug Ford's ass to being a pain in CBC's?
Well, which is a good point to raise, right? Because you remember me at Queen's Park, and I don't think anyone at that point in time would say that I was a champion for the Conservatives. I ran into Dave Piccini, who was in Ottawa on Tuesday. I was coming out of the committee hearing, and he was like, yeah, you definitely were not. But I was at Queen's Park.
And just for people who don't know, David Piccini is a cabinet minister in the Ford government. Correct. And Correct. Someone you would have harassed regularly when you were there.
Correct.
So, how did you've been in media a long time. I mean, you used to be in entertainment media. You've done political media. Give us a bit of your background.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I am from Calgary. I started working in television when I was a teenager, and I worked at the CBC when I came to Toronto, and I was going to university at Ryerson studying radio and television arts. I worked on all kinds of different shows, the NHL awards. I worked on Air Farce and Jonovision. And then I started to kind of go, I left. You have to leave the Toronto market to come back to the Toronto market, I suppose. So I went to Winnipeg. I worked at CBC Edmonton for a bit, and then I came back to Toronto and worked at CP24. I did a stint at CTV National News, and then I went to Global and was the Queen's Park bureau chief there for a few years. And I got an email while I was there from the editor-in-chief of CBC encouraging me to apply for this job that they had in Ottawa as a senior parliamentary reporter. And I was kind of, okay with the gig that I had. It was a pretty good gig. But I thought to myself, okay, well, this is a step up, right? And so that has kind of been the progression of my career. More money.
I think that's important. Yeah. They recruited you.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Well, and I mean, it was a pitch, right? Because, usually you go to a job for more money. This was not that. I took a pay cut to go back because when I left the CBC, right before I went to CP24, I went to my boss, who's now an executive, and I said, I want to be here, but I've been casual for, I think it was 4 or 5 years. And she said, leave and then come back. And I said, because I do believe in public broadcasting. So I did that. I left. And then when there was this opportunity, I thought about it and I said, okay, fine. I don't really want to move to Ottawa and pick up my life from Toronto. I'm pretty comfortable here, but let me do this. And I did that.
Can we just pause for a second? And you
Sure.
mentioned something that I am very familiar with, but I don't think a lot of people know. You said you were casual. CBC loves to do stories on bad practices, bad HR practices, bad workplaces. I've known people who covered Parliament Hill for a decade or City Hall, and they have been casual the entire time, which means you're not full time. You don't get all the benefits that everyone else gets. Correct?
Right, and it is, there is a movement afoot within CBC. It's quiet, but internally it is known that these casuals are fighting for their rights. When I was casual, what would happen sometimes is that you're at the point where you'd flip over, and then right before that, all of a sudden you're not scheduled for a week or two, so that you revert back. So it's this constant kind of game of like trying to reach the marker but never being able to get there. And it's really unfortunate what they do to casuals at CBC, because they are there sometimes working for years and years and years as essentially full-time employees, but they don't have all of the same
I'm telling you, I have never been anything but a full-time employee with benefits working in the private sector media. And it was only working close to people from CBC that I found out about this. And especially, as you say, I forget what the marker is, but once you've worked a certain amount of full-time regular hours, you are automatically go in, and then suddenly, oh, they're off for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Not because they're
exactly.
taking a vacation, they're just not scheduled, and this is just a horrible way to run things. So I just wanted to point that out because CBC likes to portray itself in a certain fashion,
Yeah.
and they don't live up to their own expectations, the expectations they have for other people.
Well, and it's unfortunate that the mainstream media doesn't take more a closer look at some of these issues. The casual story is a big story. I'm sure there are a lot of people that have been affected that would be willing to speak, even off the record or on background. Some might come out and speak publicly, but it's a major hurdle. So to get back to your original question in terms of kind of like how I got there, that was how I got there. It was at Global. They basically recruited me. I went through their process, and I became parliamentary senior reporter. I flew around with the Prime Minister. I was in Ottawa. I backfilled on Power and Politics, and then I came back to Toronto for a number of reasons, including the environment in that bureau. I will just say it was somewhat frosty from certain individuals. There's some great individuals there, still there, that I chat with and talk to, and I consider friends. But there was a level of coldness from certain individuals. So I came back to Toronto, and I was working on the National. I was a Toronto reporter, and then I would do these stints again on contract with Marketplace. So the Marketplace is also, they've had 3 hosts for I don't know how long. But again, it's like these contracts where you flip over. And then they offered me this show. They encouraged me to apply for this show, Canada Tonight, which was in now its 3rd iteration because they had lost 2 hosts previous. And I thought to myself, I was a little hesitant at first because Marketplace, I was enjoying the work that I was doing there in terms of kind of in-depth investigations and consumer stories. But I thought this opportunity does not come along often to have a prime time show across the country with your face and name. And I can really make a mark here. I can do something with this program that is unique to me. And I think, really relevant to the Canadian story and bring, a wider range of perspectives. And that was how it was branded. I mean, even if you look at the promotional materials, the thumbnails that they had up, the press release that they put out, the job description, this was all in there in terms of bold voice, news leader, booking guests. And so at the beginning when we were in development, I did see some red flags in terms of, okay, these are some things concerning, but I thought, okay, let me just push through. This is the development process. We'll get the show up and running, and it'll be fine. And I called you at that point when I was trying to put together this panel, uh, and I wanted to do something that was unique, that popped the Ottawa bubble, that had a range of perspectives and really kind of opposing perspectives as well, and not kind of like curated and shades of gray, really black and white, opinions, bringing them
Well,
together.
I remember you calling me,
Yeah,
and I was away on Christmas vacation,
yeah,
driving around the California desert, and you called, and
right,
I laughed out loud at you. You said, "I'm hosting this show. I want you to come on." and I laughed out loud at you.
Yeah.
And
Which I was surprised by, because I was like, why wouldn't you be able to come on?
yeah, because they've so many times I'd gone through the. There's a process at CBC. Not every show does it. Your show did not, but a lot of other shows, they call you up and they say, "Are you available?" And you say, "Yes." Okay, well, we have to schedule a pre-interview, or sometimes a pre-pre-interview, and you'll do
Right.
2 interviews before you go on, and they ask you every possible question they could, and then they take your answers to a producer or the host, and then they decide if you're going to come on. And I would get through the pre-interview, and then they'd say, "Sorry, we're going in a different direction. We're not having you on." So I laughed and said they'll never let me on, and you said no. I assure you they will. And I said I will only do this for you if you can get me on. I will come on. And I forget how many times I was on, maybe 4 or 5. And you promised real debate, and
Yeah.
you and your guests delivered. I remember being on with Jagmeet Singh's brother, Gurtan, and we're sitting on the couch together. I forget who the third guest was that day. The bell rang, or you introduced the segment, and Gurtan just jumped in and started laying haymakers on me. And I thought, okay, it's on. And we had a
It's good TV.
really good debate that
Yeah.
was still respectful,
Right.
but you could tell that we're going at each other. And at the end, we shook hands and walked out to the subway together, chatting, talking about family, talking about work, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like it was a real debate that you too often don't see on
And you were
TV.
on with Sheila Copps too.
Yeah. Yep. But you used to get flooded with complaints for having me or people like me on.
Well, it was not the typical segment that you would see on CBC, and so it was not really kind of reflective of the coverage that was kind of on either side of me. And so, sure, it was probably a bit jarring for the regular CBC viewer to see Brian Lilly on a panel with Gurtan Singh. However, I did think that there was value in having that conversation and kind of reaching a broader audience. You have a distinct audience, and I think having folks like you on would, maybe pique the interest of some folks to see what's going on here. Let me actually tune in and look at this conversation. But I look back now and I think to myself, was there some kind of effort to say, okay, let's let them do this for a bit, and then we'll pull it back? And that is what happened essentially, right? I mean, I was able to do the panel for a very short amount of time before it got canceled. And then they're saying, oh, well, it was we didn't say it was actually going to be canceled. If you look at when I said it was canceled, and then all of the shows after, it never appeared again. So there's CBC's version of reality, and then there is the truth, right? So, and of course, CBC is entitled to their story, and they have put out statements saying that I'm mischaracterizing things, which is their right, and this will be tested in the Canadian Human Rights Commission. However, I thought it was really unfortunate, and there were issues in terms of equity as well on these panels, which I was really quite upset about behind the scenes, and I would push back.
So tell me about that. I got paid. I insisted that I get paid because I know CBC pays its guests, and I thought I may as well get some of my money back. And so not an insignificant amount. I think $500 an appearance, and it would take me about an hour. You know, time getting there, time on, and then leaving. It's about an hour. That's pretty good.
I mean, I also think maybe they thought, okay, if we didn't pay Brian Lilly, it might become an issue, but they didn't pay others, right? And so it was this thing behind the scenes where we'd always be kind of like, and I mean, the team had an issue with it as well, but they were just like, okay, well, we can pay 3 people or something like that this week. Whereas other programs had robust funding. So I raised these concerns repeatedly. If you're going to approve a panel on the show, then fund it accordingly. Don't create this inequitable situation where you're choosing who gets paid and who is not getting paid, that contributing the exact same way. And it kind of flies in the face of all of these uh, values and statements that they put out when it comes to DEI. this is something that is pretty clear cut. Somebody's doing a job that somebody else is doing the exact same thing. They should be getting equal compensation. And that was not the case. I raised these concerns all the way to the DEI department. I have mail track because I was an investigative reporter. That email was opened once and never looked at again. So they didn't take these concerns seriously. Instead, they thought, let's cancel the panel. But I trucked on, and then, of course, as I outlined at the beginning of my statement in committee, there was the infamous tweet incident.
Just before the tweet incident, you
Yeah.
mentioned one of the people that you were given a list saying you can't book these people; they're ours. They belong to power and politics. Was Rob
Mm-hmm.
Benzie? Rob Benzie is a reporter
Who's
at
a
the Toronto
friend? Great
Star,
guy. Yeah.
and yeah, you and I have worked alongside Benzie. I guarantee you, he gets paid when he goes on Power and Politics.
Yeah.
These guys get paid in the other shows, so paying some and not paying others. And you mentioned at committee that
Yeah.
sometimes it was people of color not getting paid, while white dudes like me were getting paid. And you raised that with the department that you would think would be very attuned to that, and they didn't do anything.
They didn't do anything. Yeah.
Let me ask you about the Melissa Lantsman incident.
Mm-hmm.
What happened there? You book the um, deputy leader of the Conservative Party of Canada
So they
to.
approached us.
Okay.
They
But
approached
at that
us.
point, they had a boycott of Conservative MPs going on Power and Politics, right?
Well, the Conservative Party at that point in time had raised concerns about what they viewed as political bias from particular programs and particular hosts on the network.
David Cochrane and
And
Rosemary Barton.
so I'm not saying anyone's name here, but I know that concerns were raised, and I know that management was aware of this concern, and they said to me, "We know it's a problem. We're going to have to do something about this." But I said to them, while this issue is being worked on, because it is a problem, and we should probably look at some of the root causes for why this is the case. We can't just not have conservatives on the network and only in clips. That doesn't make any sense, and it also, to me, is in contravention of what we are supposed to do when it comes to our mandate. And I went so far as to go into the Broadcasting Act and look for the subsection 11, whatever, and lay all of this out in great detail a number of times. And then at one point I was told, and I said to them, we also have to remember the timeline here, because we're going into an election period. And so it is even more critical to have all of these political voices on the network. So, they said to me at one point, there's going to be a review of this policy. We understand your concerns. And so I was optimistic that, okay, if these folks get in a room, all of the news leaders and review this, they will realize that it's problematic for a number of reasons. They allegedly did this review. I said, how did that go? Oh, we're going to stick with it. So anyway, I had known Melissa Lantsman from when she was like on staff on the Ford campaign. She became the deputy leader. There was a pre-existing relationship there as somebody that I knew kind of behind the scenes in politics, and now it's somebody that I'm covering, that we have to cover all the time. And I thought, this is an interesting opportunity to have the deputy leader on, and it was right before like a caucus retreat. And so I said, I'm in studio, and I said, yes, but because I was so fearful of getting in trouble, I looped management. And they said, oh, you looped management. That's, bad optics for us. I'm like, okay, but I'm not allowed to have a conversation in terms of having her on the show. And so then it went to other programs, and there was a back and forth, and it was this craziness right before we went on air. And eventually, I made the decision, or the team made the decision, we have to do her now. And so we did. And then I was forced to send an apology note for having her on the show.
You had to
And
apologize to the
I
folks
had
in
to
Ottawa?
apologize yes, it was a very like, I am so sorry. I will never do this again. How could I do such an egregious thing as to have a politician on my show that other programs aren't able to secure? And so it was kind of diminishing me, right? It was diminishing. It was putting my show was second class, and I felt like I was second class. I raised this. Like, I mean, there are documents and G chats where I'm really kind of, this is continuing to happen. And I said, I feel like I'm second class at this network. When it comes to, do we only want one group of individuals interviewing people in power? Now, I know, I talked to Ben Mulrooney about this yesterday on his show. And he said, well, there's a pecking order everywhere. I get that, Brian. I've worked at, all the networks except, City TV and Rogers. I understand that. There is. However, having a ban on politicians coming on a prime time program and being told, well, you don't really need to cover politics. That's part of the daily news. I'm sorry. If a politician appears on one program, okay, is there a need for them to be immediately after on the next program? Probably not. However, if they're not appearing at all and there's only one party's view that really is expressed, we should have, the opposing side. And there was an issue on housing, right? And I said, Randy Boissonneau has been on for X amount of time, with the Liberal government talking points. I feel like we should get the opposition critic on that. No, can't do it. Sorry.
When I've been a host in both TV and radio, I have, you know, certain guests would be exclusive to certain shows. That's normal. Um, like I would establish a relationship with a certain guest and they would be a regular. Well, then other shows were told, okay, you can't book that person or you have to coordinate. I have,
Can I
we
just
call,
stop you there for a second? Can I
sure.
tell you something on that point? So these guardrails, quote unquote, were set up around certain programs. I asked for equitable guardrails around intersection, right? So say if you were to come on intersection, you'd be branded as that. So I was like, okay, if this is the way that things are being done, I just want to level the playing field here. This is all an email. No, you can't do that. So there are two sets of rules.
So you know, when I was on TV, I had the biggest show on the network. I had the most viewers. That allowed me to be able to say at certain times, no, I want that guest. But there was never you can't talk to anybody from this political party or
Yeah,
this, sector of the economy or what have you. That only Brian can speak to these people. That would be ridiculous.
right. Well, and I will tell you as well that this was something that came into place. So you know, there was a host that went to another network, who was very well respected in the newsroom, and this policy was not in place when they were there. This came into effect after, and it
I'm
came into
assuming that's
effect.
Vashi Capellos.
I can neither confirm or deny. However, I will just say this: Vashi Capellis, I think she's a fantastic host and a great person. And I think that she does a good job in terms of balance, and kind of, not pulling her punches with anyone. But it came into place after there was an incident, when Michael Chung was supposed to appear on CBC with a
He was
host.
all mic'd up and ready to go on air with Hannah
You remember
Thibodeau.
this? Yeah.
Yes, and they pulled it. I've talked to Hannah about this. I've talked to Michael about this. Um, that was a demand that he be pulled. It was about something happening in breaking news, and so Hannah was having him on, And my understanding is the team at Power and Politics said, no, we want to talk to him in several hours from now, and canceled it while he was waiting to go on. And after, I believe
In
he'd
the
already
lobby.
been, yeah, he'd already been, they promoted that he was coming on, correct?
Yes, and I think I believe so. I'd have to double check on that. However, I do feel like the narrative that was constructed around that incident really was unfortunate because certain on-air individuals had to bear the brunt of those decisions when they were not involved in that. And it really kind of fell on management and particular programs that they made that decision. And Michael Chong walked down the street and did CTV instead. So I don't, and so then they're like, okay, well, we need coordination around this so there's not confusion. So we know, that it always has to go here. It can never go anywhere else. And so then these protocols were put into place, which were problematic from the beginning, right? Because this document that they had, it framed as coordination, and it was weaponized to be veto control. It was weaponized to put one show subordinate to another.
We've got to take a break, pay some bills, but when we come back, I do want to talk about you putting out a tweet about the CEO, and then suddenly you're not on air.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice, that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country, and it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of the emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Host Media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. We'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history, and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026, anywhere you get your podcasts.
So let's talk about the Catherine Tate incident. She had appeared before committee.
Who I've never met, by the way.
You've never met Catherine Tate.
No,
Neither have
I have not.
I've met some past CEOs of CBC, and they have not been fans of mine due to my reporting, but that's another story. But Catherine Tate had appeared before committee. There had been layoffs. She also did an interview, I believe, on The National, which is part of why you reached out, where she talked about that they might still be handing out bonuses, even though they were in the middle of layoffs. So you decided to ask for an interview. Did I set it up correctly?
Yes. Well, so we had a discussion as a team about whether or not we had been thinking for a while, actually. She was on kind of this, running kind of list of folks that we would want to have at some point. We wanted to have a conversation with her just in general about the network, but it became kind of more of a news hook when there was this conversation around bonuses.
Yeah,
And
it was a
so
big news story. They were
it
telling the
was.
government, we're going to have to lay off, I think, 800 people. But
Yeah.
don't worry, all the executives will still get their
Yeah.
bonuses.
Yeah. And so we thought, okay, let's do it. And as a team, it was not an individual decision. As a team, we thought, okay, let's go get this. So it was a Chase producer who reached out to Miss Tate's office, and then very quickly it was declined. And so I got forwarded the email thread, and I talked to the Chase producer and said no. And I said, well, is it a blanket no? It's like, no, it's not. She's not coming on. Just period. And so I tweeted as I was going into the studio this on April 19th at 3:17 p.m., which has 430,000 views. At a time when the public broadcaster is under increasing scrutiny and when transparency is needed, Canada Tonight requested an interview with CBC President Catherine Tate. We want to discuss new budget funding, what it means for jobs, and the corporation's strategic priorities ahead. Our request was declined. This is unfortunate.
And
right?
What happened after that? As memory serves, you suddenly were no longer on air.
Yeah. And so this was very surprising to me because when I had gone into the office, colleagues had, saw the tweet and they were saying, good on you for actually calling her out for not having some transparency and accountability and going on one of her own programs to discuss this. I talked to my executive producer who was like, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it. It's factual. And I went on air that night and it was fine. And then shortly thereafter, I got a call in the morning, which there's, I keep very good notes, Brian. And I was essentially told there are some problems here. There's some big problems here, and you're not going on air tonight. And you're not going on air for a while because we have to haul you in to this disciplinary process. And in fact, you need to stay at home for this. This is going to be done virtually, and HR is involved, and your union's going to be notified, and it is this long investigation.
Is this all or mostly about the tweet, or is it about other things?
Okay, so it was about two things. So when they canceled the panel, and I think you probably would have been on this email as well, so you have the exact email. You can pull it up. You could read it. It's a very, just the panel is on pause, I think I said. I would like to know your feedback so that I can take that to management so that they have an idea. Not to make an editorial decision, but just so we get a sense from the folks that were contributing on the show how they thought it was going. That was a problem, I was told. Because, they said, oh, well, some people are getting paid. And I said, okay, but don't we want feedback? We're not, using this as an editorial determination, but we should have kind of all of the input before we decide what's happening here. What they left out of that conversation was that, not everyone was getting paid. And so those were the two things that they put together in this letter to say, we have to go through this process. And it was hell. And
so I'm just reading the note that you sent out. And
you can read it.
I can't. You expressed that you were frustrated. This is Tuesday, April 16th, 2024. And you detailed how diverse the panel was in every way, shape, and form that you could mean that, including diversity of opinion and thought. You say that, you asked us for feedback, and that you've got meetings coming up in the coming days to talk about this. So feedback would be appreciated,
Appreciated.
if you're to bring it back. But
Yeah.
there was nothing in that deserved being hauled in for disciplinary hearings.
And everyone wrote in. I have all of the feedback right here, and it's from cross parties, cross the spectrum ideologically. From journalists. There's one from Mike Schreiner here with the Green Party. There's one from Gurkhan. There's one from you didn't write in, by the way. You didn't give feedback, but it was all, it was all very positive in terms of the what they thought it brought to the network. And so I didn't view that as an issue. Apparently, that was an issue. And so then I'm in this process, and these went on for days. They were hours long. There was one specifically about the tweet that went on for hours and hours. And I'm sitting there, and they're trying to say I editorialized. I read you the tweet. They're trying to say I editorialized by saying this is unfortunate. And it's the perception of bias. Well, there's lots of perception of bias going on elsewhere, and I don't see anything being done.
Saying it's unfortunate that someone declined an interview is hardly editorializing. You, of course, should be disappointed. You asked them to come on because you wanted to speak to them.
Right. Yeah. Well, exactly. And so, and I, during this process, I raised concerns. I said, it kind of is, this feels really weird for me because the news division should be, there should be a firewall between the news division and the corporate offices here, and we should be able to report on ourselves. And so they were, you can see that they're running around trying to find any kind of in to get me, you know what I mean, on this tweet. But I mean, it was factual. It was there. And then we moved to the panel, and then that was a whole process as well. So, just this whole thing kind of, and I was also under a gag order at that point in time. They told me you cannot speak to anyone, so I was isolated. I remember at one point I said, I mentioned to my brother. They're like, you told your brother? I'm like, well, yeah, I needed to talk to somebody about what was going on with me. So,
How
in the
dare you talk to your
newsroom,
brother?
yeah, I know. In the newsroom, I think it was pretty clear to folks what had happened. I put the tweet out and then I disappeared. This came up at committee. I think it was Philip Lawrence who asked the question of Miss Tate. And she kind of really just kind of skated around the issue and said there were no repercussions. However, there are ATIP, records that show that there was a conversation that was had on the day before she testified in front of that committee.
She was briefed.
So, yeah, by, senior leadership. So there was awareness there. So, I mean, maybe she just misspoke. Maybe there's, some clarification that is needed around what exactly transpired. But
so let me ask, how much of this is dysfunction at CBC versus how much of this is that you're a pain in the butt and a difficult employee?
Yeah, I guess so, right? Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, stating facts as a journalist is a pain in the butt. Wanting to have diversity of opinion is a pain in the butt. But I mean, it goes back to this whole idea of me being a token, right? Should my voice not matter in terms of some of these discussions that are going on, in terms of like the panel on the program, in terms of some of the booking decisions that are made? Well, it felt like that at the beginning, and then slowly it started getting stripped away as they saw, I wasn't just going to kind of go along to get along in terms of just being a stenographer and teleprompter reader, that I actually,
in my view, my experience, show hosts should have a large say in what goes on the show that bears their name. And
sure.
I've dealt with show hosts who do not do that, but I can't work that way. So you mentioned token. Do you think that you were hired because they said, "Oh, brown guy"? That checks the diversity box. And if so, did did they assume that they were getting a certain type of brown guy, someone that would just go along with all their progressive ideals?
I don't know, Brian, if they looked at any of my coverage at Queen's Park. That I was pretty, dogged in terms of my reporting there. And I'm not a shrinking violet. So I don't know what they thought they were getting. Uh, but I came in to have a voice and use my brain. I did not sign up because I wanted to be tokenized as the little brown boy, as I've said. But when I started voicing this stuff, it became a concern for management. And I will also say this, that there is this,
So you do think that part of what was going on, both in terms of when they first hired you, when they gave you the
well,
show,
yeah, this was the
that it
diversity
was,
show.
here's a brown guy.
This is the diversity hour, or 2 hours. It was an hour, and then it was 2 hours, back and forth. I mean, look at the other hosts, and also, I mean, folks should look into why those hosts left as well. Like, there were problems on this show, and so now I'm the third person to come in, to try to figure out this time slot, and similar things happen to me. I mean, folks will have to speak for themselves in terms of their experiences on the program, but I kind of knew, okay, they want this to be like the diversity hour. Okay, but is it going to be on an equal playing field, right? But it became filler content. All we had to do was fill the slot between 7 and 9 p.m., not make too much noise. And I assure you, if I did that and I just read the prompter, what would happen also is we would repeat 60% of the 7 o'clock and the 8 o'clock, so it was essentially the same show. If I just kind of did that, I probably would have been fine, but I honestly thought I was there for my brain.
Well, you actually had me watching CBC, which on purpose. I'm not stuck in an airport. When you launched the show, you had me watching it because it was interesting. So I asked you.
Can I say one more thing on this though?
Sure.
Just related to kind of the dynamic, because I'm sure folks are going to say, oh well, he was probably difficult to work with, this and that. I had a pretty good relationship with the team. I mean, we used to go out to social events and stuff like that. I was looking through pictures the other day of us going out for drinks and going to look at the eclipse and stuff like that. So the team was young, but we had a pretty decent relationship. So yeah, I mean but that's what's going to happen, right? There will be this narrative. Yeah, he was a difficult guy to work with. I mean, I have concerns with management. My issue wasn't with the team more so than the management decisions that were being made.
I asked you about if they hired you due to the color of your skin. You said yes.
Yeah.
Do you think they also hired you because or sought you out because you were a pain in the butt to Doug Ford, a conservative premier?
Oh yeah, well that's what got their attention. I think. Well, maybe, I don't know. Clearly, there's I got on their radar at some point in time. I think it was probably during COVID, because I was on these calls that we had to be on. Perhaps they saw that, but I mean, there was clearly a reason why the editor-in-chief reached out to me. I don't know. I mean, I think that they also have to hit these quotas, right? Let me read you. I read some of these messages from other folks that I got, but wasn't able to get into kind of the great detail of it. But this was somebody, and I will just preface this by saying that these are allegations. This is somebody who was an anchor in Vancouver. I've worked in newsrooms across Canada, and for more than one network. And I can say unequivocally that CBC in this specific market was the worst work environment I have ever experienced. The culture there was incredibly toxic. Speaking up or advocating for yourself often came with consequences. There was a strong focus on protecting the image of the corporation, and many people were afraid to speak openly about what they were experiencing. After about a year of working as an anchor there, I was suddenly removed from the anchor desk. I was told the decision was related to the color of my skin, that as a white person, I did not fit the diversity targets they were trying to meet. No concerns about my performance had ever been raised. My frustration was never directed at the individual who stepped into the role. My concern was with the system and the reasoning behind the decision. In my view, the decision reflected tokenism rather than meaningful inclusion. And then they go on to talk about this checkbox that had to be checked.
Tell me about the form that producers would have to fill out
Well,
of.
so there was the form, and then there was also, this that I wasn't aware of. But I'll tell you about the form, and I'll also tell you how that kind of played out in real time when it came to news gathering. So I was pulled into an office when I was on the Consumer Affairs show, and it was a producer, an excellent producer, by the way, who had some real and had been there for a very long time, uh, and had some concerns about this form that the producers were forced to fill out about diversity. And so there's diversity tracking, but you want your metrics to be the right metrics, right? But they would have to go in after, and it's on a couple of shows from what I understood. And I saw this, this form, and they'd have to go in and after the fact check off if like this person is a man, a woman, non-binary, the person that was being interviewed. So you could do a streeter. I could say, hey, can you talk to me about the cost of bread? Oh yeah, it's really high right now. I think Canada Foods or whatever it is needs to change their prices. Great, done. Moving on. Then you're in post production, and the producer has to sit there and check male, female, gay, straight, bi, asexual, all of these different boxes. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? So I thought that was problematic. I went to leadership on the program. I then went to, they're like, well, we're told that we have to do this. So then I went to, senior leadership in charge of the news division. I said, this is a problem. Like, what kind of metrics are you getting here? How the hell am I supposed to know if somebody is asexual from asking them the cost of bread? Sorry, I didn't think to ask that. And nothing was done about that. And then this individual says that, and I didn't even know that they had this. I was told to check a box. I was told that a box was expected to be checked in the system if the person interviewed was a minority. I believe it's important to include a broad range of voices and perspectives, but reducing interview subjects to a checkbox felt like an overly simplistic way, which it is, of approaching something that deserves far more care and thought. I share these experiences because I believe the culture within the CBC should matter to Canadians. Journalism plays an important role in holding others accountable, and that responsibility should extend to the institutions that produce the news. So, yes, is this fake DEI? Is this the facade of DEI? Sure. Is it to get your numbers artificially up? Looks like it. I mean, so like there's not enough thought put into this. If you want to put window dressing up and paint the walls, you also have to look at the structure and all the cracks in it that are falling apart, and not just do this in terms of the public positioning of the corporation, right? You have to listen to people that this is affecting, and that includes this white anchor who was allegedly taken off the air because they wanted to replace her with somebody who is not white. And that's tokenizing that person as well.
By the way, got an email from someone who worked at CBC in Atlantic, Canada, saying they were also told they could not ask for interviews with certain politicians without the permission of Ottawa, even if they wanted to ask them about local or regional issues.
Yeah, right.
You had to get permission from Ottawa.
Can I tell you one other thing on and in terms of how this stuff kind of played out in real time? I remember being on a shoot with a field producer, and this was a younger field producer, and we're gathering, right? We're news gathering, and this field producer, there's this black family that's walking around this event that we were at, and the producer goes, "We need one of them." And then they ran to go get it's like literally like a token you put in a machine and then you win a prize, right? It's like it's that, but that's, and I thought to myself, I didn't blame the producer because I'm like, well, that's what this is what they're expected to get. So of course this is how it's going to play out, but it's reducing, our interview subjects as well to checkboxes.
Last question to you. Why should anyone care about all of this?
There are so many reasons, and I was very, I'm doing the show with you. People will say that I am, again, this is only for the conservatives, and only the conservatives ask questions on the committee. But that is unfortunate because I raised some major concerns in terms of a number of issues. In terms
I
of
think the
tokenism.
conservatives ask questions because they see that there's an issue, and the liberals were playing defense. So I said last question, but I'll interrupt myself, and that is, do you think there is a real bias against the conservatives?
Yeah, but can I push back for a quick second on the conservative thing? I also think the conservatives are using this for their own, they have their own playbook, 100%. So I'm being used as a pawn by everybody, right?
For sure. But do you think there is an inherent anti-conservative bias within CBC?
Let me just read you one more thing from another person who I did not read, because this is somebody that still works at the network, right? And this is what they said to me as I flip through my pages here. The CBC's political bias is an open secret. No honest person can deny it. It needs to start speaking to all Canadians and end the sanctimonious march toward irrelevance. It's a member of their own staff saying this. Right?
So I've been complaining about it for years. Nothing's been done. I've documented stories, problems inside that are HR issues, like you have mentioned. Nothing's been done. So why should people care about your story and the problems you're raising?
Because I think if enough noise is made about this, like, listen, I'm aware that I'm being branded as like the anti-CBC guy, which if folks looked a little closer into this, they would realize I'm not, and that I actually do believe in the need of a public broadcaster, and that I worked, there for a long time, and that I would not give up a 6-figure job full-time with a pension if there weren't serious issues at the public broadcaster. So I think that they should care, because there needs to be fairness in terms of employment standards, particularly everywhere, but particularly when public tax dollars are being paid. And there also needs to be balance. The CBC doesn't get tax, money from just one section of this country, one, party affiliation. Not just liberal Canadians are paying for the CBC. Green Canadians are, conservative Canadians are, and so they have a duty to represent. If this was a private company, they would not have the same standard, but they have a duty to, with balance, represent all perspectives equally. And I do not think that they are doing that right now, and I don't know where accountability comes in. I hope, and this is why I am speaking out, that I hope that enough noise is raised, that something is actually done, but I have no faith that that's going to happen, because what the CBC has done time again in these situations is bury their head, push through the storm, and continue to get funding. So until we see some accountability on the, from Ottawa on Parliament Hill, I don't think anything's going to happen. I don't know what your take on that is.
I don't think anything's going to happen, but I'll keep pushing, Travis, because we're paying for it either way. Thanks so much for your time.
Cheers. Thanks, Brian.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please remember to hit subscribe, share this on social media, email it to your Aunt May in Whitby. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice, that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country. And it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum, and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Host Media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. We'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026 anywhere you get your podcasts.